heard of anyone who leaves the front door of their house open? I mean, not just unlocked, but physically actually open to where anyone walking by can see inside the house or even go into it. Well, that's something I witnessed on a recent trip to Cartagena, Colombia. Colombia is known for a lot of different things, but I did not know that the way that their society is and the way that their communities are, that sometimes people will just leave their doors open. I'll jump more into that later, but quick quiz. Do you recognize this song? That's the first one. That's the second one. If you recognize either of those songs, great job. You're very well into common pop music. But also, those are songs from famous people from Colombia. The first one, of course, is Hips Don't Lie by Shakira. And the second one is Mi Gente by J Balvin. Both of them are exports of Colombia, for lack of a better term. Some other notable stars are Caliuchis and Maluma. So they have a lot of strong music coming out of that country. And other famous exports of Colombia include, of course, their coffee, their leather goods, and the natural emeralds that are dug up from the ground. You're probably wondering why I'm even starting with these little facts about Colombia. Well, first of all, I don't want you to be confused with Columbia University, which is in New York City. This is Colombia, the country in South America, a place that I visited for the first time recently. Now, my listener, similar to me, you are probably most familiar with the popular pop and Latin music coming out of Colombia, like the ones I just shared. And you may not know as much about the culture and how people live day to day. This isn't the History Channel, but I want to give a glimpse of this beautiful country based on my travels. So next time you listen to Shakira, you'll feel a little closer to her because I know your hips don't lie. Also, I was inspired to make this episode because it reminded me of when I was growing up, where there was a lot of neighborhood connections and a sense of community. And living in that situation is so helpful, whether it's just knowing your neighbors, whether it's having people that you can ask for help if something comes up. So, welcome to Lush Life No Labels, a podcast about living your most luscious life on your own terms, exploring the struggles and joys of self improvement. I'm your host, Fatu. Make sure to click the follow button to access all of my past and upcoming episodes, and share this podcast with anyone who may be interested. I'm excited about today's podcast episode on Cartagena, Colombia, and the power of community as it relates to how people live there. I talk a lot on this podcast about relationships with friends, family, career, all of those things. And I learned a lot about how people in Cartagena live their lives in relation to those things and how different it can be compared to where I or you may live. Quick history before I jump into my trip and why I'm even making this episode. Before Europeans, different indigenous groups lived in the area that we know now as Colombia, and they left the area eventually once the Spanish settled there around the 1530s. Cartagena is a city right on the northeast corner of Colombia, right on the Caribbean Sea. So when it was initially set up, it was a major port city, and Spain used to send a lot of money for them to fend themselves against pirates, but it was robbed by some famous pirates. So then they decided to build a stone wall, which you can actually see parts of today, as well as the fort where they had cannons to fight the pirates. That part of the city is known as the Walled City, which is actually where my hotel was. So it was a very touristy area, but you can still see the wall, you can still see cannons, and it's actually really cool to just see what the history of the city is just built into the modern day. Now, eventually, of course, Colombia gained its independence from Spain in the 1800s. Cartagena, though, like I said, is right on the Caribbean coast. And fun fact about them, 45% of people from there consider themselves Black or mixed Black. My tourist actually told me this, and he's mixed. The city is a beautiful place. Temperatures were 90 degrees every day, but because it's right by the Caribbean Sea, there's wind that makes it a bit more bearable. Like I said, they have a walled city where you can literally see and touch the walls that they built back in the 1500s. Another thing about Colombia, similar to other cities, of course, it has a lot of street vendors that are catering to both tourists and people who live there. A lot of music everywhere, a lot of fun things to see. When I was there, I actually went on a solo trip to Colombia. So I spent about a week or so with me, myself, and I just exploring. I went around Christmas time, and people in Cartagena and in Colombia, a lot of them are Catholic. So there were a lot of Christmas decorations, trees, Santa Clauses all over, and overall just Christmas joy all around. So that was nice to see at night. And there would be performances for Christmas as well while I was there. Even outside of Christmas, every time I went into a restaurant, there was salsa music playing. A lot of dinner places also have live salsa music that I dance to. A lot of great food there as well. And actually, another thing that I found out on one of my tours is that there's a financial ranking system in Colombia. It's similar to the US tax brackets and our credit system, except this one is public and everyone knows your status. It's called the estratos system. It's an economic stratification. And in the whole country of Colombia, including Cartagena, neighborhoods are classified into six estratos, which are strata, based on infrastructure and housing, which can influence their utility rates or their tax payments. And the system is also used to determine which subsidies and cost of public service that people get. There are six of them. So one and two essentially are low class. That's how they say it. Three and four are middle class, and five and six are upper class, or rich people, I should say, high class. I found that very interesting because compared to the US credit system, this was something that was super random. I start with this brief history and facts about Cartagena because it's important to paint a picture of where I was before I jump into some of the observations I had around community. It's important to understand how people live in the city in order to understand how they interact with each other and what living their life means to them. For example, in the US, there's a higher cost of living compared to the people in Cartagena. We spend a lot of time here worried about money and how to pay our bills, and everything here is about money. Not to say that people there don't care or don't worry about money, but there is a much lower cost of living so that you don't need to make as much money just to survive, especially around healthcare, around their food. I mentioned the street food. Those are really, really cheap. There's not a lot of street food culture in the US, for example. The other thing, too, is that a lot of people are, of course, into tourism, and that makes a lot of money for the city. So they'll either be tour guides, they'll do boat tours, they'll do day trips. That brings in a lot of money. So a lot of people are actually employed by the tourism system. So it's very service oriented over there. And I just found it interesting that they had this whole numbering system for people that's on your ID card. Because in the US, we don't even have our credit scores or our tax bracket on any of our identification. That is information that is personal to us. I asked someone if it's weird to have their ranking number on their ID, and they said no, because that's an everyday life thing for them. And it makes it easier to identify the types of services that are available to them. They don't need to go back and forth and they don't need to bring all of these documents with them. So I thought that was an interesting way that they live. Now, my story of the week talked about how people leave their doors open in Cartagena, open and unlocked. I was really shocked when I was on my tour and we walk by this street and just see a bunch of houses with their doors wide open. And the tour guide's like, "Hey, why do you think people have their doors open?" Some of us said, "Well, it's a hot city here, so they're opening their doors to let the fresh air in, to circulate the air inside of this place." And while that was correct, the actual answer is that there's complete trust amongst the neighbors. My tour guide actually said he leaves his door open too. So even while we were on the tour, he said his house is open right now. Why is that? Because there's a lot of trust and community in Cartagena. People rely on each other. They know their neighbors. They'll sit outside at the end of the workday and sit and chat with their neighbors. They'll invite them over for dinner. They'll take walks. They will bring something over to the neighbor's house if they need anything. Or if they need anything, they could also walk over to their neighbor's house. And there's no fear of, oh, these people are going to judge me. Oh, I don't know my neighbors. Oh, what if they don't want to talk to me? They don't really have that because they live in a community and these are their people. And they trust that people are not going to just come in and steal their things. Of course, I'm sure people are not leaving out their most precious items just out on the front table. But the fact that people can open their doors, knowing that no one is going to come in there and knowing that their other neighbors are going to be able to just observe and make sure other people don't wreak havoc, I think is a beautiful thing. That's very different than living in the US. Here, many people don't even know who their neighbors are, much less would even consider keeping their doors wide open. In the US, we talk a lot about privacy, and while that's good, it does keep us more isolated. In Cartagena, where there's much more community, they know the people around them and it helps them build the trust, which ultimately leads them to feeling safer in their neighborhood. So, part of living a lush life there is having that sense of community and having that sense of safetyness. I talk about community here and how in my life, in the past, I have volunteered to pick up trash around my neighborhood on the weekends with the people in my neighborhood. Parents even brought their kids, and even high schoolers joined in. And we all know teenagers do not want to do a lot, but the fact that they even came out just to pick up some trash in their neighborhood speaks volumes to the fact that we were supporting each other and we were supporting just having a clean neighborhood. Even through that, I met a bunch of other people who like to do that. And we would do game nights around the neighborhood. We would plant gardens to make it look prettier around the neighborhood. And then we each take turns going to the faucet and to water all of these plants because we cared about where we lived. And we trusted that the person who was supposed to water yesterday, I'm going to trust that they did that. So then when I go in today, I can do my thing and water. So it's even the idea of believing and trusting that people are going to do what they say, especially if it's something that you've all agreed on to help your neighborhood out. But I had to seek that out. And most neighborhoods I've lived in the US are not like that. Everyone just kind of comes in, parks, and then closes their door. There's really no other interaction that they have with their neighbors. I don't even think people go and knock on the door anymore to ask for some salt if they ran out. Also, at my old place, I lived in an apartment where there were 4 units. When I first moved in, I noticed that my trash bin and recycling bin would be taken out to the front. Then, when I got back from work, the empty ones would be put back. That's when I realized this unspoken neighborly thing going on where they'd take turns, whoever was available, to take the trash out to get picked up. So I started doing it too. So one week I would put the bins out in the front. And then by the time I came back, they were already back in the back, whether it was mine or someone else's. And it's kind of nice to know that neighbors are just doing these things, especially on weeks where I was away from home. I didn't need to worry about my trash bins being taken out because I already knew that my neighbors have this whole cycle going on and it was going to be taken care of. And that's one of the beautiful things about living around people is that you can do things like that, right? Ask your neighbor, hey, do you mind taking out my trash bins while I'm out? Do you mind watering these plants I have in front of my place while I'm out? Can I get some salt? It really could be anything. You never know. Maybe there's a package that you're waiting for and you're not going to be back in time. You might ask them, hey, do you mind just looking out for the FedEx or the UPS truck? I'm waiting for a package that's very delicate and I don't want anybody to take it from the front. Just little things like that are really appreciative. And that's why I loved going to Cartagena and seeing how people live in their neighborhoods because it was a really nice thing that they do for each other, just helping each other out outside of obviously just leaving their doors open. But the fact that they felt so good to do that and they felt so safe to do that speaks volumes as to how that society lives. I'll take it even further because another place that I visited that I did a day trip while I was there is called San Basilio de Palenque, which is the first free African town in the Americas in the 1600s. This is not to be confused with Haiti, which is the first country to have fought for their independence from French slavery. It's interesting because in this town, when they were trying to be free, the women who could go into the houses to cook and clean would see the maps of different areas and they started braiding cornrows into certain shapes that would show them where to go. And as they were trying to escape, they didn't want to be followed through their footsteps. So some of them would go ahead to the town and some of them would walk in the other direction and essentially sacrifice themselves so that they'll get caught and everybody else could be free. Again, that's crazy to think about, right? That you want to be free, but you're willing to sacrifice yourself so that other people can be free. And these days, I'm sure a lot of people wouldn't make the same choice. They'd rather just save themselves. And again, not there's nothing wrong with that. But I do think sometimes we don't want to be inconvenienced in a way. We want to have a village. We want there to be other people to help us, but then we won't want to help anybody else. In my previous neighborhood, if I never took out the trash, even though everyone else always took out the trash for me, then I'd be a really bad neighbor. And I wouldn't be surprised if they decided that they weren't going to take out my trash anymore because I am benefiting from the labor that other people are doing, but I don't want to participate in returning the favor. So I thought that was interesting that people would go the other direction and sacrifice themselves for the rest of the group. And now this town is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. One thing I love about them is they preserve their African culture, and a lot of that has to do with community. They preserve their language, they still do drumming and dance practices, of course, their food, and they have people called palenqueras, these women who dress in beautiful skirts, beautiful and colorful skirts. They have shawls on their shoulders and turbans wrapped around their heads. And every day they go around offering products, they go around talking about their history, they sing calls while they fill their basins with fruits and traditional sweets that they balance on their heads. So they're very, very famous around their town, around Cartagena, and then also around Colombia in general. They go around spreading their culture. They've retained this for hundreds of years and they want other people to know about it, which I think is a beautiful thing. And they help each other out. When I was there, I would see some of these women get tired. So some of them would bring the younger ones, for example, they would stand up, they would bring chairs for the older women to sit down and just take a breather from being in the hot sun. And while they would then take these baskets and go around and continue to do the work for the community, because ultimately they each get tips, but they can also share on some of those tips if they're working with different tour groups together. So I really like that as well, people helping each other in those times. The other thing about them is that they believe that when they die, they will return to their homeland in Africa. And that's part of the reason they retain their culture and talk about their ancestors, which I thought was really interesting. Maybe the biggest thing I ever learned actually is that there's no police force in their town. They police themselves, they take care of each other, And it's just really fascinating because they don't have crimes happening there because they're able to sit down and talk about different things. And I just found that interesting because I don't know if there's any other place where there's essentially no crime happening, or where there's a place where people actually sit down and talk things through instead of allowing it to escalate to a point of danger for them. And when I was on this tour, my tour guide actually grew up and was raised in this town where only people from the town can own land, by the way. He ended up going out of the town. He lived in Spain for a few years. He worked on an oil rig in New Orleans, was really out there. But he said actually he came back because of that same reason. He left and explored the world, but he realized that he wanted to continue to expand on this culture that is very unique. It's the only one of its kind in the world. And he wanted to spread that. There's only 5,000 people that live in this town. And so the numbers are pretty small. Some people will leave and not come back. And the town really has been preserving themselves for hundreds of years. And so he wanted to contribute to that. He was even actually teaching some of the youth how to speak English so that they also could do different tours and that they could also get some opportunities to explore some other places. Like I said, I was on this trip by myself. So I really got to talk to a lot of people while I was on this trip, including the tour guides, including other people who live there. And it really just reminded me that I am someone who values community. I understand that sometimes it can be inconvenient. Sometimes your friend is coming and they need somebody to pick them up from the airport. It would be nice if you pick them up, even if you might think that it's inconvenient to drive to the airport, because you know why? There's going to be another time where you might need something and that same friend can help you out. Not to say you should do things for people just so that they can do things for you, but if you expect other people to be there for you and to help you out for different things, then I think it's fair to say that you should also be there for them, even in the times where sometimes, yes, it may be inconvenient for you or your schedule. And that's what I found. I found that people in Colombia and Cartagena are willing to help each other out, even if it's not something that's going to benefit them, even if it's something that is going to just benefit the community overall, or even if it's just deciding to leave their homes open because they trust everyone that much. It really inspired me because as I came back, I'm in a new neighborhood and now I'm in the process of finding these things again. And I'm thinking about how I don't know my neighbors. Literally, when I heard that people just leave their doors open and do all these things to help their neighbors all the time in Colombia, I was thinking, wow, I actually don't have that right now. I did have it before in my old neighborhood, but I had to find that. And now I'm in my new neighborhood and I feel like I'm back at square one because I'm thinking about how I don't know any of my neighbors right now. And high key, I do want to introduce myself to the people who live around me. One, it would be nice just to know who lives around me, but also it would be nice to be able to ask them different things around what it's like to live in this neighborhood. If there are different things that they know about the neighborhood that I may not know, maybe if I'm out of town, asking them to help empty my bins out. And of course, I'd extend the same courtesy to them. Or if there's some emergency happening, it's not a bad thing to know someone who is familiar because that's what ultimately community is. Of course, we have community with our friends and our family and the people around us. And it's important for us to actually put in effort for those things. And I'm guilty of this where sometimes I just kind of sit around and hope that I meet people or hope that I know what's going on in my neighborhood, all of these things. But a lot of the time in the US, it's really difficult to do that. So I find that there's a lot more effort that has to be put in to do that. So I am going to challenge myself to get to know at least one of my neighbors. I'm happy I went on this trip because it reiterated for me the importance of having people around you who you care about, who care about you, who you can rely on, who can rely on you. Because sometimes I do feel isolated, and sometimes it's hard when people are busy or they live far away, and it's kind of hard to have those relationships and continue to build those relationships. So I'm glad I saw that people are opening their houses in some places in the world. And for them, that's part of living a good life, is that they can trust the people around them. And I think that's a beautiful thing. So, for those of you looking to expand your community, have you said hi or had a short conversation with one of your neighbors? If so, and you want more community where you live, try to say hi to at least one other neighbor in the next month and see how that goes. And if you have never spoken to any of your neighbors, why don't you try to say one why don't you try to say hi to one neighbor in the next month? You may be surprised at how it evolves. Thanks for listening to another episode of this podcast. Subscribe to my podcast on Spotify, Apple, and YouTube. Cheers to your lush life, and see you later.